just a breakdown rugby podcast again, and we're going to be highlighting key issues in rugby while the game's not moved forward. We're going to talk about training, finance problems, and lack of opportunities in rugby. So let's take it away.
So I think probably the main problem within rugby is down to the lack of financial stability and the amount of money that's invested in rugby. That's commercially, marketing, globally, and like sponsorship, for example, which is not enough compared to other sports.
I would also add, as when going through like a club system in England, how often did we get like our own kit until we like hit around like under 16, 17s? We never had our own kit. So like as a young kid growing up in like a club system, we never had the opportunity to have like our own changing room, our own kit. I didn't get my own kit until I was in like the under 16s properly as a team, and yeah.
Yeah, I would say the main issue at the moment is the marketing, and very little players or competitions get a good standard of marketing. There's no exposure for rugby at the moment. I mean, obviously there's steps in the right direction. For example, the documentary coming out for Netflix, but then with that you see even more problems. Like teams are refusing to let camera crews go in on certain parts. So it just seems like almost like the game doesn't want the marketing at times. Like there seems to be no effort from.
Other sports like football, mainly a lot of marketing views. You know that like they have access to everything, like everything a football has like access to. And I think in rugby they just don't want that. I think they stick to traditionally to what their core values are. And I think they got to move away.
Say, you know that Sterling advert. I think it's the Shaw on Nivea one. You know the one I'm talking about. That I've seen that advert more times just on one Chelsea player than the whole of rugby being advertised on TV. But I don't understand why rugby don't push out competitions, players, sponsors, big events. It's not really difficult, is it? It's just a lack of funding that the RFU and big World Rugby are not prepared to put out there.
I think another sorry, can I just add another huge issue is that USA didn't make the World Cup. So that means people in America who love their sports, and if you look at the money in sports in America is huge. And the fact that they won't be watching the World Cup as much is huge. Well, huge in a negative way for rugby.
I have to also agree. Like, as I know, obviously, you're mentioning the point about the USA and the popularity they can bring also being important, but I feel like looking at it domestically, looking at England, one of the things that's really killing the game financially is like you look at something as simple as salary cap. Really limiting the competition. I believe like if the salary cap threshold was higher, you saw bigger players go into different teams. As a fan, you'd want to go and see those big games, and stadiums would be filled. But rugby's at a point now where they're just slashing the salary cap and slashing the salary cap, and you look even for example in the Southern Hemisphere, it's almost the same problem. Players leaving New Zealand, and New Zealand's domestic base of players starting to be diminished, and in South Africa they can't even fill up stadiums. In rugby games, when Harlequins play Sharks, it's just empty. Yeah.
A good example of this would be like Cowan Dickey and Simmons. Like the salary cap dropped down again, didn't it, this season?
Yeah.
And they've moved to France, and that's two like English players that are phenomenal, and they're moving abroad just for the money, And I think massive.
I feel like just the problem is that the salary cap in Europe isn't the same. Like I feel like if they made the French salary cap similar to England and then the Welsh, Irish, South African there, I feel like that would spread a lot more of the players around instead of all players going to France. Because realistically, everyone's playing France because of money, and the standard is so much better. So I feel like if they just make it all the same, it'll just almost an even playing field.
Whilst we're on the topic of transfers, another thing that links back to marketing is when there's a big transfer for a big team, how often do you see it get the media attention that it would get in other sports? It's non-existent. Like Finn Russell signing for Bath, there's been minimal hype over that, and that's like a huge signing. There should be so much hype over all of it.
It's like when, like for example, like NBA like trade deadlines, football deadlines are probably some of the biggest moments in the season for those sports. But then in rugby, when like as Rohan's saying, when huge signings are made, there's zero advertisement. Something as simple as in football, fans get welcome to the stadium, and this whole massive thing. Fans will pack out a stadium to go and see a player sign for a team, right? Or rush to the stadium to see that player play their debut game. But it's almost as if, because I think then this leads on to our next point, almost like because there's not those characters in rugby, from the fan perspective, they're not really willing to invest in the game, because ultimately that's what I think you invest for, especially like if you look at football, buying a jersey just because it has a certain player's name on the back. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I would add, like when I saw Ellis Genge coming to Bristol, for example, it gave me like a reason to buy a season ticket down at Ashton Gate because he's an exciting player to watch. He speaks his mind. He's quite honest, and that's what made me want to buy a ticket. Same with Randrandra when he came, and Piatal. They're big names, and that's why the salary cap links in because you can't get these big names to these stadiums anymore and the clubs, which then spectatorship goes down.
Tally, can I just add to your point about how you said about like when players like the transfer deadline, like football have I think they have 2 days where is a non-stop program on Sky and it's all about the transfer deadline. So it's literally 2 days of them being on the biggest sports channel arguably in the world, of just them watching literally people talk about what transfers could happen, and that would be unheard of in rugby. And sometimes don't happen for like 10 hours or little ones, and they still get so much more exposure than rugby, any other sport. So
it's like to find a rugby transfer happen, like to find out whether rugby transfers happen. Like sometimes with football, I won't even need to look myself. I'll get told. But with rugby, I have to go onto the internet, I physically have to go and search for it. But like when Ronaldo came to United, for example, that was huge. Like everybody and their dog knew Ronaldo gone to United. Like it was just big news. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And while Kieran was on the topic of Bristol, a rich club, rich owners expected to win a lot. There's players in the training squad and in the squad, first team players that aren't happy with their situation, and you look at the amount of players that are leaving now as a result. But what one question on that springs to mind for me is why was that not getting any media attention? Certain things like that, like because the players don't speak their mind. I can't imagine. Sorry, I can't imagine Randrandra was happy at all whilst he was at Bristol, but it got no media attention.
And I think it is like that media attention. You have to look at if Pat Lam was a football coach, he would have been fired by now. If Pat Lam was a basketball coach, he would have been fired by now, because there's that extra pressure, that extra scrutiny that the media does provide, I think, almost in a positive way in those sports, and it almost increases that expectation to perform. But in rugby, Bristol can go on a losing streak, right? But there is none of that, and there is none of that in rugby. There is none of that criticism at all, and I think it's back to like that conservatism of the game. Do you know what I mean? But
yeah,
we need like what you're saying. We need that media to outlet those opinions. 100%.
I think that comes with
I think there's a lack of opinions though. How many times have you seen players, like you said, like the Cora Betty thing when he smashed him into touch and he stood over him, things like that is what's engaging to watch, and I think there's a real lack of that and a real lack of like emotion in the game. Like when you go watch an international game, especially at Twickenham, it's just dead atmosphere. There's nothing there. There's no such a feel to watch the game.
It just comes down to the lack of characters. I mean, I don't want to bring up other sports, but in basketball, Kyrie Irving, very controversial figure, called out his team, and a week later he gets traded, and then there's massive media coverage about it. But if no player in rugby's, they're all afraid to speak out the truth because they're all media trained, and I feel like that's one of the next problems of rugby. Is that one, there's no personality, rivalries, passion on the pitch, but there's also everyone's too scared to talk their mind, which I feel like is bad because they have that pressure themselves, and
that's another thing. And that's another thing for me. You mentioned rivalries. Rivalries, like in the past, has been huge things for rugby, and that's what sold tickets. You're looking at England Wales, meant to be one of the biggest rivalries in the world. I've seen no hype for it whatsoever. The only thing they're talking about is Welsh striking players. But it's meant to be, what sells the tickets is people building it up as the rivalry that it is. But I don't see anyone doing that.
And Brohan, I think it comes from the players as well. As much as I do have my like strong opinions in regard to the older generation, the post-professional era of rugby, what I respect about those guys when they played sports was a rivalry, right? Nowadays, you see players, not wanting. I think you said Dan Bigg against Scotland was one of the first times you actually heard a player talk trash in rugby before a game, right? But in rugby, it's almost like the players are too comfortable with each other. You see the Welsh and the English players getting along, and I don't want to see that as a fan. I want to see that passion. I want to see that fire from them. You know, that desire for their team to win. But
I want to watch like in the Welsh tunnel, like England and Wales not wanting to go out, they stare at each other, things like that. It's so engaging to watch. There's such a lack of it. It makes me just get bored of watching it.
I feel like something that can help this is, you know, at stadiums they have all home and away fans mixed, and I feel like if you, for example, the family section can stay, that can be anyone. But I feel like if you put one half of each stadium for away and home fans, it creates a rivalry and a battle throughout the game. And I feel like that's one way where you can engage the fans a lot more because they actually have something to cheer for because they're going against somebody. But when you're sat next to the opposing team's fan, you just end up just like talking about the game. And then say if one of you thinks penalty, one of you not, you kind of both just agree. There's no like rivalry to it, which is what football has.
And chants, like you go to a rugby game, apart from like the Welsh singing like Delilah and stuff. Now it's not even allowed that. And then you go, like, how many times have you seen fans like chanting at each other? You can't because you're sat next to them. Like you want to have that chant, you know, and I just don't think that it's such a lack of it.